laboring with her breathing, really difficult. She was red all over, her face was really swollen, her lips were peeling outwards. The last thing she said to me was, "Daddy, Daddy, help me, I can't breathe." And then she just fell and slumped forward. From ashes can come beauty. There's many of these sorts of phrases, and that's really what has happened to myself, and our family.
Welcome, everybody. This is Simon Gilbo with Inspired. So good to be back for another fantastic week. Listen, if you're new to us, Inspired is all about meeting different mates of mine from across the spectrum of life experience. And it's basically to counteract the relentless bombardment that we get in the press of negativity and stuff that induces fear and cynicism and angst. And yeah, what we need to hear is God being at work through different people's lives. And this week, it's going to be really, really special. Often we're hearing stories of, in recent weeks we've had nutty, miraculous stuff and sort of witchcraft stories and a whole range. This is going to be different. I first came across Nadim on Radio 4, and I was driving the car and I was weeping as I heard his story. And this is going to be a very moving week, emotional, deeply inspiring. So I want to give you a heads up on that one. And I want to welcome, I'm very glad to have with us, Nadim Ednan-Laperouse. How are you doing, bro? I'm
good, actually. I'm really looking forward to this. I'd said some prayers earlier, and our son and my wife Tanya, we also prayed about this. So, feeling good.
Excellent. So Nadim was with Tanya. They were both awarded together an OBE for their work as they set up the Natasha Allergy Research Foundation. And so they've got their son Alex, and we'll talk more about the family later. But listen, Nadim, I just want to set you off now to just tell your story. Well, give us some background, because straight away, Ednan, if I'm going to sound, you got Huguenot roots, as I have, Ednan-Laperouse, and Nadim. That's an interesting name. So what's your background?
Yeah, so I'm English or British, born in London, from parents who are both immigrants, really an English tale, if there is one. My mother's French, originally from Paris, who came over to the UK or to London in the swinging 60s when she was sort of 18, 19, au pairing. And my father is originally from the borders of Pakistan, Afghanistan, high up in the mountains, really high. And he came to the UK across the land over about a year, traveling through Syria, Iran, all those countries, spending quite a lot of time there, seeing some serious uprising and some pretty dire things happening en route. And both of them, my mother and father, met in Soho, London.
Right.
And some years later, I was born. And my name actually is a sort of probably a function of both their cultural roots. My mother, who's, if she's on the Catholic side, but not practicing at all, invariably brought up as a Catholic through the sort of Catholic French system, particularly in the 50s, 40s, 50s, 60s. And my dad, a Muslim, brought up in that way, but again, non-practicing.
All right. And stable upbringing, nothing particularly dramatic happened there, or what?
Yes, reasonably stable, loving home. But, I'd say, my dad probably had quite a lot of anger issues, to be quite honest, around really not being accepted as an immigrant in that era, trying to get work and jobs, and was always sort of on the bottom end of the ladder, everyone else getting promoted around him, though he's actually a really clever, intelligent man, and boy, does he know his history, etc. And my mother, really always kind of questioning whether she was good enough, for this or for that. And my dad, probably being on the other side of it, became more arrogant and pushy as a result of what he went through. That was quite negative, in his early years here in the UK. So I'm kind of, combination of those two, I suppose. Plus, they did separate when I was about 13, 14 years old, sort of divorced, but not, they were separated, and then ended up seeing my mother with other men in France, so sort of a lot of things as a child or a young teenager you really ideally wouldn't want to be part of or see. But other than that, I would call myself a product of a sound, broad upbringing.
Yeah, I've heard you say you were pretty straight. You didn't do drugs. You didn't have a sort of a rebellious phase particularly. You were always motivated, driven. You ended up as CEO of wow toys. So entrepreneurial, driven, ambitious.
Yeah, I think the way my friends and people around me would, for really most of the time they've known me for decades, would say really ambitious, kind of that typical kind of um, entrepreneurial spirit, always pushing at the door, always building things, always just incessantly, thinking, I can build an empire. I mean that I say that in a nice way. I mean, it's sort of a negative word, but build something in my own strength, basically. And that's what I set about to do, really, from late teenager scenario. I don't know honestly if that's just was to prove to my immigrant parents that actually, it's possible to be really successful and accoladed, if you like, in this country, the country they came to in their late teens, whether it's that or it's just something else. But it was essentially who I've always identified myself with, and what I've aspired to. And anything short of that, I would say was a letdown for myself, and I'm not happy with.
So you met Tanya. She's a fabulous woman. You have two gorgeous children. Yeah. Career's going well. And then what happens?
Yeah, I met Tanya, lovely, as I said, lovely woman, fantastic smile. One of the smiles that goes really wide. I don't know if you can. And that's for oh wow, what a smile! And really memorable. Really struck me in the pub that night when I met her. And we actually decided that we got together, obviously, and moved in together. And then Tanya got pregnant with Natasha, our first child, in year 2000. She is also, I should say, a single child. She never had a father, meaning she never knew her father, her biological father, who had left her mother, I think, before she was born, and her mother had never remarried or had never had a partner. So Tanya was brought up as a single child by a single mother, effectively. And we were both single children. So we kind of thought, well, we're going to break that identity, if that's the right word, and have two children, which is what we did. We had Natasha, a girl, and 2 years later, Alex, our son. And that was a boy and a girl. It was in many ways like a perfect thing, like 4 pegs, husband, wife, son, daughter, 4 pegs in a nice lunchbox, looking neat and tidy. Everyone's happy. Great. And we lived that life like that for quite a while, though. Natasha, our daughter, our eldest, she became allergic to different foods early on in life. And that's something we discovered really when we were weaning her, going from milk, breast milk or bottled milk, to solids, the weaning around 6 months of age. And by accident, if you like, or we discovered she was severely allergic, so anaphylactic, as the expression is, a really serious allergy to banana. Right. And rushed to hospital. Tanya and I had absolutely no idea what this was. I didn't even know the word allergy, because both Tanya and I have no allergies, no hay fever, nothing that would even be part of conversation, really. And shockingly, so good news is Natasha survived that. And it put us on a path to the whole food allergy path, totally unknown to both of us, of discovering more about what that was. And we discovered Natasha was allergic to other foods like sesame, cow's milk, and also eggs as well. And of course, nuts, a number of nuts as well. All of this made living life around food more stressful, more difficult, obviously for her, but also for us as her parents, being responsible for her, certainly in the early years, where we couldn't really eat out anywhere. Everything had to be home cooked from scratch. No processed foods really to speak of, and so on and so on. So we were very, very careful about the way we lived a life, because certain foods were very dangerous for her and could hospitalize her, or even worse, could kill her.
So, age 15, you take her and her best friend on holiday to South France, don't you?
Yes, that's right. Age 15, so happy days. It was the day after school had broken up, and myself, Natasha, and her best friend, who was 1 year younger than her, called Bethany. We we got on a plane to go to Nice, which is south of France, which is where my parents had an apartment in there. It's kind of like a holiday home, which we'd been to many times in the summer holidays, and we were very, very familiar with it. Meanwhile, Tanya and our son Alex stayed back here in London. They both had friends coming around to stay. And the point of me taking the two girls was, it was an idea actually Natasha had initiated, was, Daddy, I want to take my best friend Bethany to go and see what we do, what we get up to in the south of France. What it's like swimming in the sea and having excursions and all this sort of stuff. Because Bethany had never actually been abroad before at that time. So we're at Heathrow Airport, and we, about to take the first flight out in the morning, about 7 a.m. or something like that, to Nice. And before boarding, in the lounge, the waiting area, the girls were really hungry because it was such an early start, and everybody's tummies is rumbling, as you can imagine. So we went to a pret-a-manger, which was right there in front of us, and like always, Natasha would approach food with great caution and wanting to know what's in it, to check it's safe for her, and would read all the labels and ingredient labels and signs and all this sort of stuff really closely, and then make a kind of visual inspection of the food, like picking it up and turning it around and so on. And she did that. Bethany did it for her, and then even I did it, which is all quite a natural response, all in the flow of the way we lived our life. Mm-hmm. And there was this sandwich that was packaged up with ingredients labeled that she really liked, so we bought that for her, and I had something else, and so forth. And we kind of gobbled all that down in a matter of about 5 to 10 minutes, and then got straight on the plane. And the plane left immediately, first flight out. But things took a really, I was reading the Sunday Times, I think it was Sunday Times business section, because this was Sunday morning, and Natasha and Bethany are sitting to my right, both listening to music through headphones, kind of doing a little classic girl, young teenage stuff, giggling and all that. And I was really oblivious to the whole thing. Big broadsheet newspaper, wondering what company had done this or done that or whatever. Typical me, just my head totally stuck into that world and not seeing much else. But Natasha sort of started to feel unwell, which is sitting right next to me. And she was having difficulty breathing, she told me. And I thought, strange, because I could think of what on earth that would be about. And she lifted up her top, like a T-shirt, and showed me that all on her body were really large patches of red skin raised up by sort of 0.5 millimeter or 1 millimeter. And it looked she looked like a giraffe in terms of patterns all over her, really bright red. And it was really shocking, actually. And I'd never actually seen anything like that before myself. And I don't think she had ever been through such whatever she was going through at that moment, which was a full-blown anaphylactic reaction to the food, something that she'd eaten. And she said, Daddy, just let's go to the toilet now, meaning the toilet behind the pilot at the front of the plane, which was only about 15 feet away, and inject me with the adrenaline pen, the EpiPen. So within a matter of 8 seconds, we were doing that, literally cramped, both of us in this little toilet. Barely one person can get in, let alone two. And I injected her into her outer thigh, and I thought, wow, thank God for that. I literally went, thank God for that. This is what we need to do. This is the automatic response to reverse an allergic reaction, and everything's going to be okay. Now, I had never done this before, actually. But I remember how it works in the videos when you watch, what to do videos. And it's quite calm. Nothing, I say calm. I wasn't flapping, wasn't screaming, wasn't calling for help or anything like that. It was really, I'm in charge, I'm in control, I'm getting on with this, I know what to do, basically. Mm-hmm. Which is, to be honest, with my kind of character. I'd say, generally, that's people would say about me anyway. And incredibly, literally after injecting it and counting down 10 seconds to make sure all the liquid adrenaline had gone in, probably 10, 20 seconds later, she said, Daddy, I can't breathe. get the second one. Oh gosh. And I was like, wow, this is taking on a different turn. I quickly ran back to the chair, our seat, grabbed a second EpiPen, because he always carried 2 EpiPens, always since the beginning, and then injected her with the second one. Now I'm thinking, wow, I'm just following motions now. I know what to do, but I'm in a sort of void, but I know what I'm doing still. Now, I really thought this would do the trick. 2 strong injections of adrenaline. And she started, again, having really laboring with her breathing, really difficult. She was red all over. Her face was really swollen. Her lips were peeling outwards, literally like inverting. Quite shocking stuff, actually, visually. And the last thing she said to me was, Daddy, help me. I can't breathe. And then she just fell and slumped forward. And I literally just caught her like this, her head into my, like that. There's no room. Oh my gosh. I took her out of the toilet immediately, put her in the jump seat, which is a little fold down seat where the stewardesses or the cabin crew sit or take off. And she lost consciousness, and so she couldn't sit without being held in position. So I was like on my knees, I put her in the seat, and one hand holding her, pressing her body against the wall like that, and her head holding down, but I was holding on her chest to shove her against the wall so she just wouldn't fall and collapse. And meanwhile, with my other hand, I shouted out and waved to the cabin crew immediately, get the oxygen now. They got the oxygen. I kind of, in the same breath, told them what's going on. I believe it's having full on. And I said, put the mask on. So with this hand, I put the mask on, holding her body, still pressed them on. And then they adjusted it a bit. And then they turned on the gas or the oxygen bottle. And I said, give it here. I grabbed the bottle in my charge moment. And I made sure the tap was turned on fully. And in my physics brain, I remember going, okay, pure oxygen going down a narrow channel will offset a wider channel with less oxygen. So I was almost visualizing it, seeing it and going, this is going to be somehow okay, etc. And then in the same breath, the 2 cabin crew were like, oh, what's going on? What's it? I said, get a doctor now, make a call immediately. And they did on the PA, and this young man just appeared. I mean, he looked like my child, early 20s. Someone who looks so young compared to me. And he said, oh, hello, I'm Tom, and I just graduated yesterday. I just did my final exams on my way to Nice to celebrate with my parents. They're at the back of the plane. So we lay her down. She's unconscious, still with oxygen. We lay her on the floor. Meanwhile, the cabin crew are still trying to serve the food and the drink and stepping over her body, basically, because she's now in the galley, basically, arguably obstructing what they need to do, which is to serve food and drink to people. And it's just chaotic. We went into CPR, we went into mouth to mouth. Oh, and I was just like, I've never seen anything like this before. What is going on? And I remember just talking to her loudly against the backdrop of a humming plane sound. Come on, Natasha, come on, you can do this, you can work this. Literally like a coach on the sideline saying, come on, box harder, you can do this, punch, this. She's unconscious. They were doing so much CPR, holding her head back to try and clear the airways. Oh, it was just awful, actually. And I know the pilot had been told what was going on. So asked them, make sure the pilot knows. And the pilot was probably just sitting, honestly, 7 feet from us physically, but behind that door, the pilot door. And I had no idea at this point that they'd radioed through to Medilink, which is based in Texas, which is where there's 2 companies that the whole of the world's airlines connect to. They basically subscribe to for medical aid midair. Anyway, I thought they would land. I said, would land the plane because we're flying over France. It's a large country, lots of towns and cities and lots of runways to land on. But no, they pressed through, basically. So for about an hour, we were doing CPR, mouth to mouth. It was horrific, actually. And I was just calling to her and I was listening to what the doctor said. And I could see, was lost. He was lost. This doctor had never been in this situation before. The medical bag, on the plane didn't have EpiPens,
Right.
and so on. And anyway, she vomited, and it was awful. She'd vomited actually the food that she'd eaten, and it was all red. And I remember I'm looking at her, barely can even recognize my child. She'd swollen up, face was really red, peeled up. And the horrible thing was she'd vomited. And this is just so unreal. The vomit, which would be really acidic, had filled her eye sockets. Her eyes were open. And so her eyes would have been burning with the stomach acid, but being unconscious, she wouldn't have known. And I was really concerned about her going blind. The plane landed finally, and as the doors opened on the tarmac, these French paramedics rushed in. And because I speak French, I told them what happened immediately, and they got to work trying to do more CPR, trying to clear her airways. And she hadn't woken up; she was really unconscious all the way through for over an hour now, well over an hour. And I can't even. I have to say, the idea of, at this point of her dying or anything was just not even fathomable to me. Again, I think I was just in my own strength. Come on, we can do this. And I was calling to her all the time. Come on, come on. And I was actually running out of breath myself from that calling. That's how intense it was. The paramedics were doing really violent CPR and dripping with sweat. These big men dripping with sweat, etc. They've hooked her up to a defibrillator, to try and see what was going on with her heart, etc. And meanwhile, trying to clear the airways, which was not successful at all. There were such problems, and I now know we know why, because the airways had just shut down. You couldn't pass anything through, basically, at all, no matter how small. And they continued violent CPR. It was actually quite shocking. It was like seeing your child being punched and punched because it was so violent. And I was holding a saline, a solution with a drip that was gone into her with one hand, and with the other hand, I was gesticulating, "Come on, fight, Tashi." And her heart monitor showed it came back, and everybody was so happy. We all high-fived each other, me, the paramedics, we went, "Hey," in French kind of thing. And it was like this, because they'd been doing this for half an hour on the ground, on the floor. And it's just like, they were exhausted. It turns out they'd broken all her ribs, all her rib cage snapped because of the violence of the CPR, so forceful. And then her heart beat went. The monitor just went down again, and they continued again. The CPR again, and it was relentless. Basically, the pilot was standing in the doorway, facing me, probably about 3 feet from my face, in front of, and he was standing, filling up the aperture of the doorway completely, and he was weeping and crying, and so were the other air stewardess, and there was a male cabin crew guy. He was weeping as well. And I wasn't crying. I was actually in such a serious mode of fight mode, I remember, and willing her, like taking the will of my body and putting it in her like a battery pack. Say, "Here, take my battery and keep on, keep going." And then her heart went, basically, again. And as I told you, they're pumping away. And it came back so slightly on the monitor. And there was just, hooray, basically, And then suddenly, there I am standing, in front of everyone, and everybody blanks out, as it were. And I didn't see this coming at all. And only Natasha, in her like a photograph, if you like she is in reality, is there lying head to toe, east to west of the plane. And everybody else around me, and there's a lot of people there, all disappear. And the whole space is filled with a yellow light, a bright, kind of soft yellow light, a monochromatic yellow light all around her. From literally my entire vision is all of that, except for her as she is. And hovering above her, from head to toe, are 5 angels who were quite small. I mean, they weren't like as big as, they were probably a matter of centimeters, if I said 15 centimeters or something like that in height. From her head to toe, all just moving like this, at this speed, like that. In a slow motion is how I would put it, if rather than a frenetic motion, which I'd witnessed moments ago with all the activity. I'm just hovering there. I was so taken aback by this, and it just dawned on me that this is like in a film when an angel comes and it's a sign that somebody's going to die, and it just dawned on me in a flash, and I shouted out, "It's not her time! I'm fighting for it. It's not her time!" And I whooshed them away like that with my right hand, and they all went. The whole yellow light just disappeared, and everybody's there as they were before, but all motionless. Then nobody was moving, and their heads were down, and the heart monitor flatlined. She was gone. She was gone. Oh, heck, it was terrible. And then it decides to take that there might still be hope and a chance in some medical-esque way that would be beyond me, my understanding, to get her to the hospital now. And so she was strapped into one of those kind of portable gurneys and taken down a flight of stairs, a spiral staircase that came out of the plane. It was really awkward. And into the ambulance. And they said, "We'll take her to the hospital. You follow in our colleague's car, a white car that's part of the ambulance crew." And I got in that car with Bethany, 14-year-old Bethany, like just in shell shock, like I'd been, mortified upon or etc. And I noticed the ambulance wasn't moving, wasn't going. What were they doing in there? I was saying to myself, why isn't it rushing off to the other side of the city where the hospital is? And we started to pull away. And then in the end, we raced across town, basically with the sirens on, got to the hospital, and she was taken straight into and disappeared into some form of crash A&E, who knows what. And me and Bethany, little Bethany, were left waiting in a I say ugly, very cold waiting area on hard metal seats. And the time was passing. We were just talking, saying, "Oh gosh, are you okay?" We were like living in not in the now, but some kind of other world, just talking as if in a bizarre way. I don't know what language comes, but we were calm. We were calm, oddly enough. But in shock, I think is probably the overarching word. And so that was just shocking. And to actually fly off that morning, everything looking great and happy, and in control, and then for a matter of 2 hours later, if that, everything to be out of control, if you like, and then not just out of control, completely the worst that could happen to a human being, a parent, or we'd brought Natasha up and successfully managed and navigated the world of food and allergies for 15 years, and for her to be snatched like that was so shocking, so galling. It was horrific. And I remember going to the, wondering what the heck is going on. And so I went in to ask in French, this is what's happened. I went to the counter in the hospital. Can you tell me? I've had no news. We've had no news, etc. Said, okay, we'll check. And then 10 minutes later, a doctor, A&E doctor, came to collect me. And he took me into a little room that was a white room, probably about 8 foot square, with a little table in it and 4 white chairs. Nothing in it, no window, nothing, just all white, like a sort of prison cell made of white. And there were 2 people in there, and they told me that Natasha was clinically brain dead. I was so shocked to actually hear the words. This is now the first time someone's actually telling me, and I just broke down completely, realizing that in one hand, and then the responsibility of a 14-year-old, her best friend, in the other hand, who was still in the waiting room. And we went to see Natasha. What we didn't realize at that point is she dead? Is there still a chance? We're just in this vague la-la land, and it's not something I would ever say to a friend. she's dead. You can't say that to a 14-year-old, you know. And we were there seeing her, and the hope that she's still something could come through, holding her hand. Her body has gone really cold now, you know, because there's no blood pumping, no heart pumping to speak of. And we had her phone, and we played her music, you know, just hoping that some of the music she would like might somehow, as if miraculously, wake her up. Then they asked us to leave and to come back later. And we just followed what we were told, and we did go back later. And now by this time, I'd already spoken to Tanya on the phone and told her something terrible has happened and to get here as quickly as possible. And she'd immediately booked a flight, which was really difficult because it was the first day of the holidays, summer holidays, and there was just no immediate availability. But she did get one flight out of Stansted on an EasyJet plane. But when she had got to the airport, the plane had been delayed by 6 hours. And as we went back to a special part of the hospital where Natasha was in this room on her own, all wired up, still to a heart monitor, strangely enough. And the heart monitor was showing, you know, boop, sort of boops. I said to the doctor, "This is great news. This is great news." I said, "Look, you know," and he said, "No, I'm sorry. This is just what's called electrical heart activity due to the drugs we've pumped her with." And I started to see the poops get lower and lower. And oh my gosh, I said, you know, and I realized again what this means. I had to feel this sense of taking charge. So I quickly phoned Tanya on her mobile. I called my mum and dad. I called Tanya's mum, so her grandparents, and her brother, Alex, our son. And in quick succession, I said, "Natasha's going to die. Say your last words," so she hears them now. And I put the phone next to her ear. I did that 4 times. When I called Tanya, she was in the departure lounge and waiting 6 hours airside. And she just collapsed in the airport. And literally on the end of the last call, I remember the heart monitor flatlined. I just didn't know what to do. And I remember getting a pair of scissors and cutting some of Natasha's hair. She had really thick, luscious, dark brown hair. And I remember walking away from my child's dead body, having to turn your back for the last time on your child. And you walk away down the corridor, you walk away. Well, how is that possible? No father does that. No parent ever walks away like that. I was doing it. It's just unthinkable. Yeah, and that's how the day shaped out, that Sunday of the first Sunday of the summer holidays.
So, do you want to share? I mean, you didn't have any faith context, did you, at that stage?
No, I had no faith context at all. In fact, I'd always shut down conversations about, I say faith, I think I'd go one step removed from religion at that point. That's how I would characterize faith in my thinking back then. And whenever I traveled around the world, always staying in hotels, whichever country, there was always a Bible. You know, often still the time when there was a Bible in the bedroom drawer by the bedside table. You know, and if it was out, I always made sure I threw it back in the drawer, you know, and closed the drawer. And not to be, you know, not being particularly nasty about it. I don't want to make it seem, but it was just make the point that this is of no interest to me, and I don't need it, and I really don't care. That's how I would broadly characterize it. And also, none of my friends, who are all either, you know, quite multicultural in the sense that, you know, London as it is, none of them had a faith either. So it's not something, and I didn't get it from my parents either, as you heard earlier. So it's not something, a religion or faith that was part of me. And I saw no need for it because I felt that I could do everything really in my own strength. It was down to me to wield the sword and fight the fights, and it was based on my abilities, to build and to get ahead on all aspects really of life, work life. And I was quite a workaholic. Tanya would, I can admit that now, and Tanya would say that. And we thought we were doing okay. We, generally as a family, we thought we had everything in check broadly. The allergy situation, the home situation, the friends situation, the money situation. The kind of pillars of things that we would generally identify with. That if they're okay, then we're in a good spot, basically. So no faith. And so Tanya arrived that night at midnight after all the delays, and we were both emotionally shattered. We spoke briefly and then literally fell asleep and got up the next day. And our immediate thoughts of, gosh, we've got Bethany. We have to get her home to her family. She can't stay here. We're now going into a mode of what do we do? Our daughter's dead here. She's in a mortuary. How do we get her home? And so we prioritized just getting Bethany back to London to her parents that afternoon. And then we set on, what is basically the French bureaucratic system of when somebody dies, a foreign person dies on French soil, and what you have to do to try and get them back to, home to England. And that took some real doing, navigating that, because there's no hymn sheet on it, essentially. So we really focused on that. And we were just dazed and in shock. And we were going to the mortuary every day. And they were pulling her body out of the fridge every day. And we would just weep, standing around her, just weep. And then after a bit, they said, sorry, madam, this is too much time. Because it was summer season, the air temperature is really warm. We have to keep the body cold. So she's been out of the fridge long enough now. We have to take her back. And this would happen every day. You could only have a short period out of the cold room, the fridge room, if you like, etc. And because temperatures were in the upper 20s or sort of 32, 33 degrees, and we'd come back home and then just work more on trying to figure out how and what to do. But what happened was, the following day in the morning, I remember writing an email to basically writing what I just told you, how the angels came, and writing that and sending it to all my staff in the toy company. And I have no idea what they really made of it, because I think they were just in shock as well, to be honest. But anyway, I just remember batting that out and telling them what had happened, and then getting on with, essentially what we had to do. And it was difficult, but I found myself Googling what do you do and so on, because the British Embassy were really of no help at all. I mean, at all on such a thing. I mean, really, it's like quite shockingly bad. So we realized that wasn't going to work, and got on with it, basically. And then that Friday night, I contacted the CEO of British Airways, and I said, my daughter died on your ship, basically. The pilot is the captain of the ship, and I want that pilot, that captain, to fly her body home out of a mark of respect. And that was arranged. That's not at all protocol, but that was arranged. And on the Friday night, 5 days after she died, her body was boarded on the plane in a coffin, in a special transport coffin, which is lead lined and lead sealed in another wooden box. And I screwed the lid down on her coffin. And there's a glass bit above her face, so they can look through and you can see there's a body in there. And I'm just weeping and screwing that lid down, saying, I'm her father. It's my job. She died on my watch. I'm responsible for her. I have to do this. My duty. It's a question of duty. And I screwed that down, and it was loaded on board. And it turns out there was actually, in every aeroplane, a commercial plane, there's one space for a coffin below deck as a special slot to hold a coffin, and it was right below where we were sitting, etc. And we got back to London, on that Friday night, late night, and this following Sunday, 2 days later, I went to church for the first time, and it was Natasha's church, her evangelical church in Wimbledon, London, South London. I walked in there with Tanya. I was so broken. I don't think there are enough words to explain how broken like a man could be at that point. And I just 300-400 people all just kind of essentially their love effectively wrapped themselves around me, because they'd all heard what had happened. They'd all been praying for her. Praying, unfortunately, too late. She'd already passed away, but by the time they heard the news and so on, and that started my journey really to I say, coming to terms with God is real, coming to terms that Jesus is not just a name, some funny name in the book, but actually is somebody who's real. And similarly, the Holy Spirit. So the Trinity, which to me was a load of old cobblers before, was now, at that point, I didn't know it. I was now then on a journey to discovering and actually identifying myself as a real person in this. I say the story of Jesus. What I mean by that is, I mean that as we all are, but actually recognizing it. That's the point. Recognizing it, and that takes time. Well, for someone like me, anyway, who was very much always pushed that sort of stuff away. And I think as I began to realize, and particularly from the teaching that was given at Natasha's church, because Natasha had been going to that church as in youth group for about a year before, and 2 weeks before she died, she had told everyone she wanted to get baptized. Yeah, exactly that. So it was the beginning of a new chapter, to say the least, in my life, not just because of obviously our daughter dying, but I mean spiritually speaking, and the discovery thereafter, which has been transformational. I mean, from ashes can come beauty. There's many of these sorts of phrases, and that's really what has happened to myself and my wife, and our family. Overall, it's quite remarkable, actually.
Thank you so much, Nadim, for digging into that story afresh. I know there's a real cost to you on that. Now, I've heard you and Tanya both talk about just that. Clearly we're going to think our daughter's wonderful, but she, from the outside perspective, she was obviously just a very precious young lady, wasn't she? And she had her own faith, and that faith sort of, the yeast worked through the family bash, didn't it?
Absolutely. I mean, largely unknown to me at the time. My daughter Natasha was going to youth group at the church on a Friday, and then had started to go on Sundays as part of regular service. Not something of any interest to me whatsoever, and I don't even really think I really knew it, because I was so switched off to it. But it is true to say that our whole story really starts with Natasha and her nascent, if you like, a belief in God and Jesus, and saying that she wanted to be baptized just 2 weeks before she passed away, really set off our family on a journey of discovery, of spiritual discovery, of belief and faith, Christian faith, in a very strong way, powerful way, that has actually not only just transformed us as individuals and as a family, and actually kept us together rather than us breaking apart. But also we've been able, or given the strength and the ability, spiritual ability through God, and it really to help other people en masse in their thousands. Yeah. And that's something that I was never able to do physically, but also mentally was not something that I ever wanted to do. For me, I was making something for myself or for my family. And now our whole lives have swung 180 degrees since Natasha's passing, as we've really understood, I think, the meaning of some of Jesus's teachings and what it means for us as people, his people, and what he calls us to do. And it's actually getting on board with that, if that's a sort of bizarre practical way of looking at it, is extraordinarily satisfying. It's satisfying in such a way that was never satisfying in trying to build something yourself, because you were never satisfied, actually. It was never enough and so forth. But actually, in one hand, learning and grasping something here through the teachings that we have through the church, through the Bible, the words of the Bible, really, seeing how applicable, even though it's largely old language and uses a lot of old world analogies, cart, horse, sheep, farming, grain, and so forth, which before I thought was ludicrous, it was so out of date. Now, in this in the new chapter of our lives, certainly my life, I should say, it's super, super relevant. And I can see exactly where I fit in to those stories, as if I was a fisher of men, effectively. I was just another broken person, largely, and effectively Jesus has come along and picked me up, is how I put it. And when we have interactions, I say, with Jesus, through prayer and things, and certainly we've had a number of prophecies come true or come through, depending what word you want to use. It's so astounding that somebody who from church, etc., who can say something to you, I've had this word for you for God, and a matter of hours, 2 hours, 3 hours, or a day later, in an entirely different physical context and somewhere, it actually happens verbatim like that. It's so astonishing. It's really powerful, but in a subtle way, which is bizarre, because normally in this physical world, in the way that we all tend to think about it, in my life before, power meant something much more draconian and, like a bit like the Roman Empire, if you like, or a bit like modern day Roman empires that are happening today. But in this domain, I can just call it the spiritual connection way. The power flows really well and beautifully. And you see the results almost, I say you can see results immediately, meaning things happen. And you go, well, that is the natural order of things and not this other way that we lived before. And when that happens, you kind of go, oh, I want more of that. I want more of that. It's so satisfying, is how I look at it. It doesn't make me rich financially. It doesn't make the roof on my house get mended. I don't wear new clothes in terms of more expensive clothes. But this power is way more satisfying when it flows than any of those physical things you could think of.
Yeah. And she, I remember hearing. So, I mean, I've preached at New Day, which is the conference, the sort of summer festival of the New Frontiers network of churches that you're part of. And Alex, her brother, was due to go. I mean, it's lovely, isn't it? He's passionately on fire now. Tell us a bit about.
Yeah. So actually, so Natasha died in July 2016, and New Day, if I remember right, is in August, I think. So that was a matter of really weeks apart, and he was booked to go to New Day with Natasha. Natasha told him, I will look after you. Come with me. And of course, she died. And so her friends who were at New Day said to him, we will look after you. Come along. And on that, I think it was that New Day, he got up in front of 7,000 people on the stage and told what happened, basically, etc. At age 13 years old. And that started from there on, that New Day on, if you like, started his coming to strong, strong faith. And it's just built more and more, literally like Lego bricks that you could build and plug in, and he just gets bigger, stronger. And he's incredibly, he's so a young man of faith. It's phenomenal. And righteous, so, in a good way. I don't mean in an overbearing way. Which is really wonderful, and that's a legacy from our daughter and his sister dying, and as is my faith, as is Tanya's faith, and all the work that we've been doing through the charity that we set up in her name.
So go on briefly, because of time, but you've been able to do some really important, life-changing work, haven't you, through NAF?
Yeah, so through Natasha's foundation, the charity, we've been really blessed to be surrounded by some of the world's best, cleverest people in subjects of science, for example, and allergies. And the King, His Majesty the King Charles, has been involved from early days, and really quite committed to helping us in the ways of influence and kind of convening power for kind of important people around the world, bring people together, work out how the world can come out of allergy. And we've been doing just that. And incredibly, when we meet the government or, ministers of state, and we meet them quite often, and, we always say, we come in peace. We say, Michael Gove, we say, I remember that one particularly, we come in peace and we will leave in peace. And sometimes I can see it's appropriate to say, when they're asking questions, I say, well, hang on a minute, in front of the governments, if Jesus was here right now, what would he tell us to do? What would he say? Because we know that would be the right thing. And when we've said things like that at meetings with important people of one sort or another, it's changed entirely the kind of the feel in the room, as people acknowledge. They've hidden it, I'd say. They acknowledge that is the right thing, that Jesus does reign and does rule. And it has produced outcomes that have been very, very fruitful. So much so that off the back of that meeting, went on to change the law. It became Natasha's law, which passed through Parliament really quickly. And that has changed the entire United Kingdom's food landscape and what anybody who makes food has to do, or, essentially around laws of food and labeling and clarity. And that has benefited around 8 million people in the UK in one fell swoop. And we know that because we keep getting the letters from parents saying, gosh, because of Natasha's law, you saved my child's life today, because of what was going to happen had that not been in place at the moment, something, and so on and so on. We get letters like this all the time. And so I'm really just reflecting what we're told here. And then the science we're working on is phenomenal as well. And again, we say, we always start our meetings with big CEOs. I mean, talking giant CEOs of 10, 25, 30 billion pound companies. We say, God created us as human beings, and we must eat. God said we must eat. And we must eat to live, etc. It's not we have to eat because it's just a biological function, if you see what I mean. It's God made us to eat and to enjoy the fruits and the things that he created, grapes, dates, honey, and so on. But isn't it terrible if people can't eat those foods? So we're trying to resolve that in a scientific way. And amazingly, in the scientific community, which can often be thought of as, if I said non-believing /atheists, actually, we get contacted by brilliant minds who are not publicly Christian, but they are privately.
Interesting.
And the result of that is that, they want to help us and come forward. And that's really powerful, because that kind of glue, the glue that faith produces, is way stronger than the purely just man-made glue, and produces a much better result for us all, basically.
Yeah. Yeah, when we spoke a couple of months ago, I loved it how you'd just been in a meeting, and you go to all meetings, and you get to walk in the peace of the Prince of Peace and bring the presence of God through his Spirit. And any particular vignette moment you want to share on that?
Yeah, I think we've had so many incredible moments, which you could, for the non-believing people who may be listening to this, you might just think, gosh, that's just unbelievable. Or for those that are believing, you might call it, well, that's just how the supernatural works with the Holy Spirit, and that's kind of the norm, guys. And one of those moments was, I think we were walking Tanya and I, going to a meeting with some very powerful people that we'd not met before. And this was in the early days, a few years ago. And we were a bit anxious about it. And while we're walking to the meeting, we had a phone call on the mobile, someone from our church, saying, I've had this a word from God from you, essentially, and I need to tell it to you. And essentially saying we're about to walk through a plough field. It's really difficult. It's bumpy. You're struggling, etc. But the harvest will be big. And we thought, gosh, what on earth is that? Essentially, and we hung up because we were walking. We were kind of nervous about meeting these big people, etc. And then, half an hour later, there we are in the meeting room. We've got people who are observers who are not participating, but they're part of the observing team. So all this was witnessed. And as we're talking, and somebody very powerful, one of the richest men in the world, was there, and one of his colleagues leans across the table like this and whispers, "The harvest will be big," and then just moves away. What? I couldn't believe it.
Yeah, crazy.
And it turns out that he had this feeling on his heart. We later, years later, met him, and he just felt compelled to say that to us. Wow. And it's not something he would ever normally say. It's not part of the meeting, really. And all this to say, I think what I've discovered personally on my journey is God works in incredible ways, and often not in the way you might expect. So you make an ask and you say, can you get me from A to B? But sometimes it'll take you from A to C, but the C wasn't anticipated. But the C is still a good spot because he's got a plan for you. And what we discovered from this was the harvest has probably two interpretations, but the one I'll call out particularly is helping people come to faith through the work that we do. It's like a bilateral thing, a twin system. We're physically saving people from dying because we're helping to solve food allergy for the world. At the same time, we keep meeting, literally hundreds of people every week and talking in these big seminars and so on, where we talk about often a bit of faith and how God plays a hand in our work and how God is the CEO of the charity and not a man or a woman in a conventional sense, and how the harvest is actually about helping people come to faith. So a bit like a fisher of men, if you see what I mean. And so we realized actually God is truly using us in the situation we're in. He's pushing us forward gently and nicely and enabling us to do things for his purpose. And I think what's amazing about that, we all understand what it's like to be in a play as adults. We've all been there in a play and done some drama. But when you're in this, it's God's play and you're really part of it. And he gives you what you need, even though you've not practiced the lines. It's remarkable. And it works. And you feel happy. My gosh, what is there not to want out of that?
Yes. Oh, brother.
Hi, my name's Russ and I currently live in Plymouth, and I've been listening to the Inspired podcasts for just over 3 years. The stories are all fantastic, but if there's one story that stands out for me, it has to be David T, the primary school teacher. It's an incredible story and it's just so mad. And I think it is the podcast stories really that brought me to make a mad decision of my own, choosing to join Great Lakes Outreach on a 2-week trip to Burundi. Because there's certain experiences in life that just mark you. They just change you forever. And Burundi was one of those for sure. So I love these stories. I love Inspired, not just because the story itself is so powerful, but because we're all called to be in the story. It's that realization that God hasn't finished with you yet. And I love that.
Listen, we've got to wrap things up. I just want to come up very briefly to the angels on the plane. How significant was that to you?
The angels on the plane were very significant. And the way I processed it is I'm a visual person generally, etc. And I tend to believe what I see. I'm always looking at details of things because that's my design background and engineering background as well. So I'm always looking at stuff that other people often don't notice. That's generally seems to be the rule. And I have realized that if God had not shown me that very powerful, I call it vision, that appeared in front of me, that's the way he needed to show someone like me, knowing my character, to make me make the next move. Anything short of that in some other format, what is there? Smell, taste, hearing, touch, etc., probably wouldn't have worked for me. actually, but he knows who I am, my character, what I was like. And he did that piece just in a flash, essentially, and it changed everything.
Yeah.
It's not the only time it's happened either. So, it's not a one-off. I've had other things happen, which in exactly the same way, you go, wow, this is so true. You can't deny this stuff. It's only a fool would deny it, actually. That's how I would put it now.
So just as we go our separate ways, brother, there'll be people listening in a lot of pain, some with faith, some without faith. What would be your encouragement and words to them?
Yeah, I would say to people who are not people of faith, really, and that's fine. It's not a criticism. It's just, you are just like I was. I was someone, as hopefully you've heard, who didn't think they needed faith, thought that crossing a line maybe to have faith was really completely insurmountable and not doable, totally blocked by my own, I would call it my own brain activity. But since unlocking that, or having that unlocked for me perhaps, and being moreover a willing participant on the journey of what happened next, has actually revolutionized my life, the life of my wife, my child, and many people around me, my inner circle, outer circle, and beyond that, in ripple effect, in such a way that what I can tell you now is I have now more friends, more influence, more of just about everything, basically, than I've ever had before, of things that matter, basically.
Yeah.
The things that really don't matter so much, I'm not so much concerned about anymore, because they were really very finite. Where I'm in a position now is so much more beneficial for me as a person and my ability to live well in the rest of my life, and to do well as a father, to do well as a son to my parents, and of course, above all, to be a good son, a good, child of Christ, a child of God. And he gives me so much ability and power, which is open. It's so important. It's open to all of us, and entirely free. And I really get that. God can swoop in, I would say swoop in and change everything in a flash for the better. And it's always for the better. And if you should never doubt that. And if you know it's always for the better, and if people keep telling you that, then, only a fool really would continue to deny it. And I mean that in the nicest way. I don't mean that as a criticism. I was a fool. I'm happy to call that myself, like that. But I'm no longer that fool. And that's really important. And I can, only say for those listening who are still doubting, listen to me, listen to the story. We're not that different. We're made 99.9% of the same flesh, blood, and bone. The only difference between us now is I have a strong faith. My life has taken a new, incredible course. And if you're holding back, that's the true difference between us, basically. And it's time to make that change.
Yeah. And you could make that change right now if you wanted to, by let's pray. Father, thank you that you love us. Thank you that you see our pain, our wounds. And we just say, we need you. And we ask you to come in by your Spirit into our lives and join us on that journey.
Yes.
In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen. Yeah, thank you.
Well, if you've done that, guys, if you're new to this, do get in touch. I'll put Nadim's email in the chat. Nadim, I don't know if you've read A Severe Mercy by a guy called Sheldon Vannekin.
Yes.
But I was thinking about him last night as I was getting ready for this, and I read it about 20 years ago, but basically A Severe Mercy, that's the title of it. He's a very deep thinking author, and they hooked up with C.S. Lewis at Oxford. And The Severe Mercy, I think from memory, he had this very idealized deep love with his wife, Davy, and she died of cancer, and it was that the journey using C.S. Lewis, in the process of coming to faith through the pain of grief, and A Severe Mercy is just an interesting way of looking at it, isn't it? God has God has used you. He's used Tanya. We cheer you on. Guys, I will put the Natasha Allergy Research Foundation details in the chat. And I'm sure Nadim would love to hear from you. And we cheer Nadim and Tanya on and Alex, young Alex, as they follow Jesus and run the race that he has called them to. God bless you, Nadim.
Yeah. Thank you so much, actually. Thank you so much.
Bro. Thanks, bro. Right, guys. Whew. A different one from other weeks. I mean, they're all different, but you know what I'm saying. Listen, I know there'll be people you know who need to hear that. So do pass it on, gossip this podcast. I'd love you to give us a great review on Spotify, iTunes, just so that more people, the algorithm gets it to them. And I want to thank Adam Thomas Steer for the editing, Mike Sandeman for the mixing. Next week, another fantastic guest from a very different story background. But I look forward to being with you again. In the meantime, have a good week. God bless you, and toodaloo.